Hey homies, what's up? So today we're going to talk about how to start organizing yourself for your compare contrast essay that you're going to write. So to start, you've all got this organizer. Hopefully you have it out in front of you. You're going to start by putting your name on it because I like to know who you are. And I like to spell my name right too. Then you're going to come down and you're going to write the two texts that you're comparing. Now, for me, I decided I'm going to focus on my favorite book ever, Anne of Green Gables. I'm going to italicize it like I do with a book title. And I'm going to put the author to by L.M. Montgomery. And then I'm going to compare Anne of Green Gables to one of my other favorite texts, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. If anyone has not read either of these books, they're amazing. You should read them. So I've already spent a bit of time thinking about what are some of the traits, and I think we talked about this in class too, what are some of the traits that I can compare when I'm looking at two pieces of literature? So earlier we were comparing things like squashes or two different jars of peanut butter or two differently shaped rocks. And so we thought about traits like shape or color or weight or cost. Now we're thinking about literature. So we have to think about traits of literature. So one trait we've talked about a lot lately is theme. So I want to compare the theme of Anne of Green Gables and the theme of Little Women. And I know we've talked about how books have multiple themes, but the main theme that I can see in Anne of Green Gables is that sometimes young people can have more wisdom about things than adults. And it's kind of interesting because the theme of Little Women, I would say, is almost the opposite of that. But sometimes you have to listen to the adults in your life because they have lots of wisdom to share. So I'm going to go under differences and I'm going to say the theme and I'm going to shorten it, Anne of GG, is that sometimes young people have more wisdom to share than adults. I'm going to use a fancy contrast word. I'm going to say, whereas the theme in Little Women is that young women should, or I'm going to say young people should listen to the advice of their elders, people older than them. So that's the differences I see in the theme. I could probably come up with some similarities if I really thought, but I'm going to move on for now and think about some other aspects of the novel to compare. So another trait I might think about is character development. Now, let's see. One difference I know of is that Anne of Green Gables is focused mostly on Anne's development. Development of a single character, Anne. And Little Women focuses on the development kind of four characters, March sisters. Then again, there is kind of a main character in Little Women, and it's a woman named Jo, or a girl named Jo. And Jo and Anne actually have a lot in common. So I would say they're both the protagonists or the main characters, the person we're rooting for. So I'm going to say the protagonists of both novels are creative and kind of, I'm going to say, and both they kind of go against the grain, I'm going to say. They're not your traditional demure, sweet, obedient female. They're both kind of more rebellious and adventurous. So both go against the grain, not your typical sweet, princessy damsel. These two notes are just for me, so I can write whatever nonsense I want. For the writing style, I would say both books have a lot of imagery and figurative language, a lot of descriptive terms to paint pictures of the scenes. And while they're not exactly the same, I think they do have very similar styles. So I'd say both novels are very descriptive and use lots of figurative language and imagery. And I obviously, if I were writing an essay, I would want to go and find some real examples to prove this. I might show an example of imagery in Anne of Green Gables and an example of imagery in Little Women to show how they kind of align with each other. So the writing style is definitely similar. Another thing I might consider is the narrative point of view. So that's who's telling the story, which character's thoughts do we know? And actually both of these stories, or both novels, I should say, are in third person narration, which means that they're told by a narrator who's outside the story, and we know the thoughts of one primary character. As far as the tone, that's kind of how the author tells the story. It's kind of hard to describe the tone in this case because the narrators are kind of neutral in a lot of ways. They don't really, the narrator's just kind of telling the story without necessarily having an opinion. But I guess you could say that in terms of the mood, both stories are kind of inspiring and hopeful. They have a lot of lessons that the characters learn, but they're always kind of positive and uplifting. So I think I would maybe say a positive, uplifting mood. And I could probably say a positive, uplifting tone too. Um, so in terms of setting, sometimes it's important to think about the setting and how it might be different in two texts because what's going on in the world around the character can impact their behavior and their decisions. So in this case, Anne of Green Gables is set around the early 1900s, I believe. So AGG, I want to say it was published in 1908, I think. So AFGG happens in the first decade of the 20th century. And then Little Women is happening during the time of the Civil War. So that would be like the 1850s. So one is slightly ahead of the other. And I think it's important to notice that difference because earlier I mentioned that there's these two different themes. And in Anne of Green Gables, the theme is that young people have much to teach adults. And I wonder if maybe the fact that Anne of Green Gables was published a little bit later in time, maybe it made that easier for that theme to be communicated than it would have been in the 1850s when there was more of a, a mindset of respecting your elders and not fighting back against when your parents' rules. So that's an interesting thing to think about. In terms of genre, both are fictional novels. Oh, and also for setting, I should go back. Anne of Green Gables takes place in Canada, Prince Edward Island, and Little Women takes place in New England, so in Massachusetts, I think. And so I could, if I was going for like big general similarities, I could say both take place in North America, on the eastern coast of the continent. If I was going to, go that route. So this is basically how I would start off this process. I'm hoping that this is helpful to you because I'm expecting you to take the two texts that you choose and to kind of do something similar. And you might think of a trait that I didn't think of. I don't know all the traits ever. So, think about what traits you can compare in your two chosen texts. You might have to compare genre. Maybe one of your works is a poem and one of them is a short story. Then you would want to write down that they're different genres. Maybe you want to write about the author's craft moves and how they differ. So there's a lot of options here for creative thought. Come up with as many as you can so that when the time comes to write your essay, you have lots and lots of information to draw from. I hope this helps, and you guys are awesome.